Sorry, the space was full on my phone. Not only was, so we were talking about John 2:23 through 25. Not only was it a good thing for people to recognize him as fulfilling that mission, I mean, that was kind of the point. In fact, it was so central to his mission that was actually the charge for which he was crucified. They said that if we had time, we could go there. They said that the crime was he was making himself equal to God. And they criticized him because they thought the only way that could happen is if he brought God down to humanity. But actually what he was doing was showing humanity how to come up to God. He wasn't coming down at all. He came down from heaven so that all men might be lifted up through him. And so, quite opposite of it being a bad thing, this was his glory. This was how he glorified the Father, was to demonstrate him. To glorify means to manifest the goodness of something beyond previous limits of perception. There's nothing greater that you can do on earth than glorify God. It's why we're here. Yeah. Anyway. So, as you learn more about God and love others as he loves them, as he loves you, because he's showing you his love, as you turn around and flow that out to everybody, to the full measure of what they'll receive, no matter what it costs you, you'll find yourself saying that there was no man. Because part of this process, I want to tell you a little bit, at least, about how it goes, so you're not just flapping in the wind. As God leads you up in the true vine, in his way, there are times where he leaves you, seemingly, where he leaves you to go as far as you're willing to go by yourself. And the reason I put by yourself in air quotes is that you're never alone. His purposes require for it to seem like you're alone. But at any time, he could tell you exactly what he told Elijah when Elijah felt alone. And he said, I have thousands of men who've not knelt to Baal, who's the false god. He was saying, I have thousands of people right now who I could bring, who if I brought near to you, you would no longer feel alone. And then in the end, Elijah was led to Elisha, who upon meeting him immediately did everything that all people should have been doing the second they met Elijah. And you can trace that story through to the end if you would like. So again, coming back to this Isaiah 54:7, I forsook you indeed momentarily, but with loving compassion I will gather you up. And Jesus, of course, is our example in all things, and the pinnacle of his affliction was this perception that the Father had forsaken him. And that was, of course, not the case. But he had to let him think that. He had to create a veil so that he wouldn't see. So that, I'll tell you the real reason, and this is the real reason when he does it to you. And if he hasn't, he will, as long as you don't really mess up before then. But if you endure to the end, eventually along that path, what I'm telling you is going to happen. And you'll find yourself alone, and this might continue for a long time. And the purpose is, but odds are this has already happened to you. And the purpose is, or was, so that in the resurrection, when all memories are retained and recallable perfectly forever, you will confidently be able to assert, there was a time where I genuinely felt alone, and I still did everything that I would have done if I knew the Father was right by my side. And that is what we're aiming for, to come into the presence of God in eternity, and to see as we're seen and know as we're known, and to be the same way there that we were here, to be able to be there in that. That's the goal, is that we act on earth as we would in heaven in all things. And that's perfect faith. That's what we're shooting for. That's why we're here. That's why such elaborate planning and execution over such a long time and at such great price had to happen to bring all this about, was to construct a place where we could learn, where we could be given everything necessary to come as close to that point I described as we were willing to. And everything has been provisioned for you and I to do that. So that aloneness, it ends when we meet someone who's more reliable than we are. But until then, you will feel these periods of aloneness, but it's for your benefit. All right, so we talked about evil, we talked about natural evil, and the evil in the hearts of men. Okay, so when we think about the epitome of evil and the wrongs that will be righted by God in the judgment, which maybe you're not even there, so let me just say that the end times is about a lot of things, but one of the things it's about is restoring God's justice. That's to establish God's kingdom, is to make known his law and provide everything needed for everyone to come up to live it. And then finally, when everything has been done that can be done, to help everyone do that, to flip the switch and impose the consequences of God's laws. That's probably new to you, or maybe it's an explanation that extends what your previous understanding was. So thinking about what that might look like, you might be in a place where you're thinking, well, the Hitlers of the world will be, fire will come down from heaven and burn them up or something. You're going to be surprised by the level of, you're going to be surprised by the thresholds of, I don't want to say punishment, but the pouring out consequences, the negative ones. You're going to be surprised by who's hit with those and how badly. And I need to tell you this, and this won't be the first time, and it won't be the last time, but maybe it'll hit slightly differently. I need to tell you this because what you are going to experience, it will include these kinds of surprises where God will turn up the intensity of certain things so that you turn up your intensity on what you desire and by how much. And that's a key purpose of the end times, is to help you focus that. So, while there are, these archetypal bad guys floating around, and actually there will be far more of them as time goes on. Really, what corrupts the world is not so much those people. It's all the people in the middle who seem like decent people. But they show the limits of their goodness at the point of surrender. They will demonstrate the evil in their hearts in their reaction to people who are like Jesus. Not just in reaction to overt spiritual teaching, but in reaction to their very presence and in reaction to their suffering that they witness. It doesn't take very much to trigger these limits, it turns out. Right now, it's rare to find a righteous person. It will always be the case until the ratios are radically adjusted by the wholesale destruction of those who don't qualify. But between now and then, there will be a dramatic increase in the number of these people who are fully reconciled to Jesus as far as they understand him, and who respond to further light and truth by treasuring it and loving it and living it and sharing it with others to their full extent. But even now, the light is cracking over the horizon of the dark night, and there are emissions of light that cause the reaction that follows. Here we were reading the end of John 2, but if you go to John 3, where Jesus says, this is the condemnation, that light has come into the world, and men loved darkness rather than light, because their deeds were evil. For everyone that doeth evil hateth the light, neither cometh to the light, lest his deeds should be reproved. But he that doeth truth cometh to the light, that his deeds may be made manifest, that they are wrought in God. And there's a lot to this passage, but just to sort of snap a chalk line right through it for our current purposes, those who are currently reconciled to what they believe about Jesus in everything that they do, feel, say, and so on, desire, they will respond to the emission of further light and truth, the revelation of further light and truth. They will respond to that by perceiving, receiving, valuing, and becoming what's revealed to them. When that light manifests that something that they currently or in the past did, felt, or said was less than what is best, they will immediately repent. They will seek to make amends, to restore the damage that they've caused, and they will retain a remission of sin through immediately forsaking it every time they discover more. And this is how you stay in the path to God. So, onto these normal people. There are so many normal people, so-called, in this world who have the appearance of good, but actually whose hearts are evil. And it's just that their lives are such that they've been given sufficient camouflage to hide that from themselves and others. But they know already, because they're not reconciled to Jesus. There's a corner of their hearts that they know is not aligned. And they keep it secret from others, and they try really hard to keep it secret from themselves by squishing down their conscience and offending the Spirit of God to the point where their rebellion against him is not a raging, fiery signal. It's just a quiet little whisper. And it's one that they can cover with artificial intensity in life, or drugs, or alcohol, or relationships, or work, or travel, or any of these other band-aids that don't actually work. So, about a week ago, we have a few dogs, and one of our dogs, about 4 years old, I think, we needed to go get her spayed so she wouldn't get pregnant again. And we were told by the vet that she needed a rabies vaccine in order for that to happen. And we called around to every vet in town to try to find somebody who wouldn't require us to do that, because we had done the research on the rabies vaccine, and we were shocked to find how frequently this causes adverse effects. Things like cancer at the injection site, or permanently disrupted behavior in various harmful ways, and so on. And this shot is prescribed, I believe you get 2 in close succession, and then you're supposed to get 1 every 3 years. Well, we couldn't find a vet that wouldn't do it, because apparently it's actually the law in Montana that a vet can't see a dog that doesn't have an up-to-date rabies vaccine. And so we decided that the benefits outweighed the costs, and that we would just go ahead and get that done. About 4 days after the shot, my beautiful, vibrant, dog, she started getting really stiff. And her eyes just got really weird. They were bugged out, and she wasn't blinking properly, and she seemed disoriented, and this just sort of happened. And then she stopped eating, but we just thought maybe this, sometimes it's quite frequent, in fact, with people and dogs. You get a vaccine and you get some of the symptoms of what you're vaccinating against, and it's part of the immune response and whatever. And then she quickly got worse, and she stopped eating, and she got more disoriented. Her joints started stiffening up. And so over the process of 3 days, about, at the beginning of the 3rd day, she was in very bad shape. And we called the vet. And this is where it all comes together. But, before I get into this, we can't know the burdens that other people carry without the gift of the Spirit of God. I guess if there's a bright part in that limitation, that cloud of limitation, it's that most people are so shallow that you actually can know the burdens they carry quite easily if you're of at least middling intellect and you're not a psychopath. You have at least some degree of empathy. But when character is so much deeper than anyone who doesn't have a deep character can realize, character is this amalgamation of all attributes: personality, intelligence, just the whole kit and caboodle. But if you split this different ways, it helps to illustrate this principle of depth and perception. So depth of being and perception of being, whether you're knowing yourself or others. Love, for example, you will only be able to recognize deep love in another person to the limits of your own love. Intelligence is the same way. Someone with an IQ of 85, by the way, IQ and intelligence are not synonymous, but this is just, it's like talking about benefits in terms of money. It's a very thin sliver of the big idea, but it's measurable and easily comprehensible. It's something with which we're familiar, and so it helps us better understand the whole, without too much brain work. So various aspects of character can be very deep, but your ability to see that in others will be limited to your own possession of those qualities at that level. But where I was going with this IQ, if you have an IQ of 85, there's no way you can understand what it means to have an IQ of 100, let alone 140. And so you can understand these things just beyond your own limits, and that's it. That limitation, it in some ways is a blessing, but that limitation is the reason for so many things in the gospel. There's so many, it's the explanation for why so many things work the way they do. Like why we need a hierarchy of people in God's kingdom in order to ascend closer to God. That's why, because if you're not close to Gabriel in terms of quality attributes, you can't actually perceive what he would tell you. So when an angel visited Manoah, who was Samson's father, to tell him about this this promised son that was going to come to him with a special mission, Manoah knew enough about the way things work to ask for the angel's name. And the response from the angel was, "Why should I tell you? You won't understand." Which we've talked a little bit about why people don't receive angels as much as they could. One of the reasons is you get offended over stupid things, and you don't accurately anticipate how seemingly offensive people who are more righteous than you will be to you. Jesus said, and I was actually going to mention this related to another point in this video, but Jesus said, "It must needs be that offense come, but woe unto him by whom it cometh." And that's a very important scripture. Anyway, many applications to it. So we were talking about depth of character, and I got onto that because I was going to tell you that it's very difficult to accurately judge the burdens of others, and the greater the burden is, and the better the person is, the harder it will be to do that. And one reason this wreaks havoc on our perception system is that we judge other people by absolutes, but God never does that. It's always holistic. And what I mean by that is, the woman taken in adultery, Jesus treated her differently than the Pharisees would have treated others in that situation. But he treated her differently than he would have treated others in that situation, because her situation was not limited to the fact that she had been caught in adultery. There were more factors to that story, and they're very important. And so part of his perfect judgment is looking at the whole picture. We read in the scriptures that he looks on hearts. People's intent matters. It's not just the action. But we judge people by action unless we're judging ourselves or someone we want to bless. And then all of a sudden we give them the benefit of the doubt and impute, typically excuses, but we impute extenuating circumstances to them. Anyway, so we're talking about depth of character, and going back through here. So you can't accurately judge the burdens people are carrying without the Spirit of God and or great wisdom, which is all the same. Although you might not think that yet. So when someone does something, everything that's behind, not just why they're doing it, but the other things that are going on with them, that all matters. I've publicly agreed with this idea that Jesus has a sense of humor, and I publicly disagreed with the common perception of what that means. And at least one person has asked me about this, and I don't think I really addressed what they asked, but I think that the intensity of God's humor, it would seem limited in the eyes of many if they knew it. But the beauty of a smile from a being that has etched the depths of the bottomless pit into his soul. That's worth so much more than the laughter of a fool, for example, whose ignorance makes it easy to experience mirth. You know, in The Lord of the Rings, when Frodo comes back from their mission, he really struggles to reintegrate into the whole Shire culture. He just can't go back to where he was before he did what he did. Sam, on the other hand, Sam manages to do that. He finds a wife, he has some kids, and he gets back into his old groove, merged with the greater wisdom that he's attained through this journey. And he brings much more to the table than all the people that didn't go with him, because he has this depth of wisdom beyond the fact that he saved the whole place. He and Frodo did. But you can't see things the same way once you've seen more. You can't see the same things the same way, and you lose something. But what God gives you is greater. So it's interesting that so many of these myths talk about this journey into the underworld, into the depths of darkness. And the hero typically loses an eye. This happens in many versions of this story. The hero loses an eye in the process of the journey, and the eye is given sacrificially in a battle with the darkness. And it's the price that they pay for the boon of wisdom. And so in God's version of things, you actually see more with one eye than you do with two. It's better to go to heaven maimed than to go to hell intact. But when someone's carrying an enormous burden, the same things mean different things. And a smile from Jesus is brighter than certainly the laughter of a fool, the hysterical laughter of a fool even. And also, so that's ignorance, and also the laughter of innocence. So when a baby laughs, it's heavenly. It's heavenly to be free from everything that must co-occur with that. But when a person who's borne the lashes of darkness, like Jesus did, when he looks down the cross and from that position arranges for the well-being of his mother and his best friend, who just let him down just a few hours before, let him down in his moment of greatest need. That means a lot. It means a lot more than it would under other context. But these things are not always obvious, and so it's harder to see, which is why things have to happen that express in a visceral language at very low resolution the tiniest fraction of what's actually happening. Because the Lord on the cross was the least bit of the ordeal of his lifelong sacrifice. It was the least bit. Even that, what made that hard was not the actual crucifixion. That was, of course, brutally difficult. Most people who have lived on this earth have not had to endure that. But thousands of people did. And that doesn't make them like Jesus. It doesn't give them even the slightest way of understanding what he did or becoming what he was like and is like, but of replicating his life, his character in life. So I don't publish these videos typically as I make them. They can be sitting around for months even. But this one I will publish today, these two. So for the last 3 days, I've interacted with people, I've had to work, and I don't think, I think two people outside of my house had any inkling of this, and both of them, it was just on the third day. One, because I had a question needing this person's expertise, and the other because that was my mom, and I needed to set aside my own process of this to inform her, because she knows this dog very well and she loves this dog very much. Anyway, back to the story. On the third day, which was yesterday, as soon as the vet office opened, we called and we talked to the desk person. And of course, we didn't get any information, and the answer was just bring her in. So my wife did that and took a kid along to help her with the physical needs of lifting this dog that can't really move. Because I had to keep working. I just don't I don't have the bandwidth to set aside things more than I can right now. And so I set that all aside and I tried to do the creative work that was before me, which, I find it much easier to do mechanical work when I'm sick or fasting or my mind is preoccupied. But creative work is a special challenge in all of that. And it's different flavors. They're all slightly different, but the challenges are all slightly different. So when my wife called from the doctor's office, she put me on speaker and we had a conversation, and I said, I think our dog has rabies. These are all the symptoms of rabies. And she said, well, has she been bit by a raccoon or a bat? I said, no, she hasn't been bit by a raccoon or a bat or anything else. We've watched her. I mean, she hasn't been outside by herself, because I didn't tell you this part, but we got her spayed at the same time as the shot, which is what we did with another dog we had before this a while back. We still have her, but that's what we did before, and that's a standard protocol kind of thing. And so after the surgery, you have to confine the dog so that they don't, especially with huskies, they'll rip their stitches. You got to keep them calm and not running around. And so that means that they're in the room with you, or, if you're outside, you have them on a leash, and minimize their physical activity. And so I said, she's been under constant observation. She was fine before we brought her in. This happened after the shot. There are no other variables here. And so then she started taking me down this road of, well, she must have eaten something that poisoned her. And I said again, there's no way. I mean, we've watched her. And she said, well, poison can accumulate in a dog's system over time, so it could happen before the visit. I said, okay, but there are only 2 possible poisons that she could have accessed. The one would have required her to go into an attic where there still isn't enough of a dose to do anything to her, even if she found every little piece that's stashed away in attics or something. There's no access to that. So, but if she teleported into the attic and ate everything somehow, she still wouldn't be poisoned. And the other is a blood coagulant, and none of these symptoms match that. But also, she would have had to somehow break into a bunch of enclosed things that were in spaces she has not been in at all, and eat all of it. Like we don't even have that much out there grand total. Like, she would have had to go to the store and buy an entire giant bucket of this and eat the whole thing secretly and then come back to her house. There's no way she's poisoned. So I said, is there anything that could be done in the event that she's been poisoned by either of these 2 means? Short answer, no. And I said, all right, so what do you recommend? And she said, well, we should put her on an IV and give her anti-inflammatories, and that might help reduce the stiffness. And I said, temporarily, because we don't know what's causing it. And she said, yes. So I said, okay, well, what if it is rabies? And she basically said, well, there's nothing we can do. She already has a shot. And I said, okay, what experience do you have in observing adverse reactions from the rabies vaccine? And she stammered, and she said, well, from the vaccine or sometime after the vaccine? And I already knew where this was going. So I said either one. And she said, well, it's always hard to tell what comes from what, this sort of like cover story. And I said, okay. So, but you've never seen a dog get rabies from the vaccine. And she said, well, I'd have to contact the vaccine manufacturer to see if that ever happens. And I said, that's the last thing you should do if you want the truth. But at this point, I was satisfied that there was nothing productive that could happen here that would positively affect my dog. So I said, in the event that she dies, is there, I understand that the only test for rabies is to take a part of the brain. Could we bring her body in to see if that's what happened? And she said, we can, but we're closed on the weekends, but it has to be right away, or else it has to be refrigerated because the brain will deteriorate and there's only so much time, but it can't be frozen because that'll ruin the test as well. I said, okay. So I told her that I thought that it's wrong that a law exists that mandates this medical procedure, and that first and foremost takes that right away from the owner. But certainly, even if owners can't be trusted to do the due diligence on this and make their own informed consent, as they do as parents or individuals, certainly that decision ought to be left to the licensed vets, right? And I told her, I said, look, I don't think this law should exist. And I want to think about something I could do to help the state reconsider this law. And I was thinking that if we had a positive test, maybe that would persuade them that this law shouldn't exist. And, but I realized in that moment while having this conversation that if the vets aren't going to come out and say this is definitely a possibility, it's the logical thing. It's most likely if they're going to say, I think a bat materialized out of nowhere and bit your dog while you were watching it, and that's the most likely thing, an invisible bat is the most likely thing, there's no way that you can get anywhere with these legislators. And the reason I'm sharing that, so obviously there's been a lot that I've talked about here. And I alluded to this earlier, just to make it plain. The reason the Lord tells me these things and leads me through these things is so that the things that I'm taught, I can share them with other people and they can apply them to their lives, hopefully in ways that prepare them for situations that would otherwise overwhelm them. So this is how the Lord empowers people through faith and through the faith of others with greater faith. This is how he empowers people with less faith to prosper in spite of their lesser faith. And the ideal is to come up to greater faith, of course. There is a relationship of stasis that's possible where you're abiding in the vine. Anyway, without necessarily ascending in the vine, but that's a topic for another day. But another purpose of me sharing these things is I wanted to tell you it's a wonderful vocabulary to communicate things that would not otherwise be communicable so easily. And so I'm just giving you those. There are many in this series of videos. So one of those things is that as I warn you about things falling apart and I show you how they already are, I know that you are reacting to that, most of you, with far less heed and diligence than the reasons suggest. And when I tell you things like, as you do what you know is best, you will be increasingly cast out of your institutions. What institutions? Work, school, church, family. You react to that by saying, well, you're a radical, I'm not a radical. They won't come for me. Yes, they will. Yes, they will. It must needs be that offense come, but woe to them by whom it cometh. One application is, God arranges people in places and situations to provide warning. When a tower fell on a bunch of people in Galilee, Jesus asked the crowd, were they less righteous than you? And they all presumed that destruction, just like Job's friends presumed that his affliction was as a result of his wickedness. The people assumed that the tower-crushed folks were less righteous. But they had never really thought it through because obviously they weren't. They were just normal people in this case. in a really sick twist that's even worse than that, modern people will look at righteous people and say, well, you deserve that because you're righteous. You're radical. You're zealous for God, and therefore you deserve to be destroyed. That's what you're saying when you say, well, they'll never come for me, but you really put yourself out there. Yeah, when you live as Jesus would in your place, you're going to be treated as Jesus would in your place. And that's on a slider scale. The more it's true, the more it's going to be true. The more it's true in the one, the more it will be true in the other. But you're not going to believe me, and I'm not going to attempt to make the case right now. The Lord has taken me to a place where this situation had nothing to teach me, but it had things to teach those around me. It must needs be that offense come, but woe to him by whom it cometh. And I hope that you get something out of this, because it's the only reason why this needed to happen. Not you, like you specifically, whoever's watching this, a person, everybody involved, the vet, my family, anyone watching this. This wasn't for me, and it wasn't for my innocent dog. This is, so to finish the story, I think I told you I woke up around midnight after about a half hour sleep. I spent, I kept checking on the dog before bed, and she stopped drinking not too long after getting home from the vet, and her throat was too swollen, and she was really struggling. She started getting foamy at the mouth. By the way, there's apparently there's two classes of symptoms with rabies, and one is the biting kind, and I guess that's more common. There's also paralysis kind, and that's what happened to my dog. She was getting paralyzed, and it also kicks on your saliva glands. That's what causes the drool, which is a real problem, because when they're not drinking water and then they're drooling too, they're getting dehydrated very quickly. And so I found a little plunger, not a pointy syringe, but a little plunger syringe, and I was giving her drinks a little at a time, and most of it just come out of her mouth. But she wasn't really scared, and she didn't seem like she was in pain. Obviously, she wasn't having a good time, but, and she couldn't walk, and she was running into things, not running, but, walking straight into things, not able to pick up her feet. I had to pick her up to take her outside and try to get her to go to the bathroom, but she's getting dehydrated pretty quickly. But in this, and again, I'm sharing all this to illustrate, to help you in your own travails. But as soon as it started to get pretty dicey, I went off by myself, and I prayed. And I was very calm. When you've been through things of a certain caliber, things of a lesser caliber, they're not any easier, but you're stronger. And you have that strength in God to maintain a rational state in what would otherwise be an emotionally overwhelming state. And your emotional brain is your lower brain. That's not the place from which you should be driving. So, I walked through everything with the Lord, and cost and benefit, because I don't have impedance to my faith. And so there's no limit, there's no intrinsic limit of what I can ask the Lord for, so long as I believe it's what he wants. And that's something that everyone should be able to say. As Nephi said, if the Lord commanded it, I could do it. But I also possess some tools that the Lord has gifted me that I have and will give to everyone who wants them. Through information, to understand a little bit more about how to figure things out. And so as I walked through all of this, I went from focusing on ensuring that my heart was neutral to discerning more about what potential costs and benefits would be in every outcome, to having great confidence in what the ideal would be, and then later to realizing that the limits of other people impeded that ideal. And one nice thing about this is that often the Lord will teach me things, or otherwise help me to realize things that I've been praying for a very long time. And one of these was the disposition of animals in the eternity. And I will say that there absolutely exists a path for us to be with the animals who choose to be with us. And that their joy there is much greater than it can be here, just like ours is, or can be. And that was very comforting to know. But anyway, so as the day wore on, I was getting more involved in trying to help her stay alive. And I thought she was going to pull through. I thought the odds of that were increasingly good. I saw that 14% of dogs do recover from rabies. I'm not sure how they figured that out, because the prescribed treatment is to euthanize the dog immediately, as soon as there's any doubt whatsoever that might be the case. And then you find out after the fact if it was through the brain test. But every website that I saw said that it's impossible for a dog to get rabies from the vaccine. So anyway, her eyes started to get a little more normal, and she started to move her head just slightly, instead of being completely rigid. And I thought, well, her body stiffening is getting worse, but maybe this is like working its way through, and if we can just keep her hydrated, maybe she'll pull through this. So we went to bed. Well, we got into bed at the normal time, thinking that things would be okay, but I was not really sleeping and just kind of listening to the breathing. So we put her in our room for monitoring and quarantine. We immediately quarantined her the second we thought it might be rabies. And I was the only one to interact with her, and I had gloves and was washing my hands and everything. But I woke up around midnight and I heard she was really struggling to breathe. And I got up, and so she couldn't get up and down. So I had to, lift her up and set her on her side and everything. And I was rotating her around because, so she wouldn't just be on one side, and giving her time to stand up and massaging her throat. And so she was really struggling to breathe, and I got up and I tried to do all those things to try to help her maybe clear what was obstructing, but it just wasn't working. And so I thought maybe she was doing a little better, and I put her back down and washed up and got back into bed, but I was just listening, and she's breathing really heavy, like I do when I'm running too fast with my asthma. And then she'd stop breathing, and I'd count the seconds. So the frequency of not breathing was enough, and the length was enough, that it was quite clear to me that she was not getting enough oxygen. So I got up again, and I just tried all the same tricks, and meanwhile she's just drooling everywhere, and I know she's already dehydrated, and I knew she was already dehydrated. And my wife got up, and she correctly said, she's getting worse. I said, yeah. And I realized there's nothing I could do. And so I put her down. This is the second dog I've had to do this with. The first dog lived a long, wonderful life. And he had cancer, and we did what we could to make that less hard for him. But he got to the point where he wasn't eating for a few days, and I said, we need to help him. And my mom was living with us at the time, and my wife. They said, he might pull out of it. I said, I don't think so. And every day, this was his normal routine, would be he'd come over and lay his head on my lap. He'd always do that. He was a very personable dog. He always wanted to be around me when I was home. And just nonstop, he'd look up at me, and it was like I could hear him saying, I don't understand what's happening, help me. That was in calendar time. It's probably 5 years ago. I don't know. Maybe 6, I don't know. But in experience time, that was a very long time ago. And that was the hardest thing that I'd ever been through to that point. But this comes at a time where I'm much further along in the forging process. And what's difficult about this is that it didn't need to happen for me or her. And that's an interesting thing, because so many of the suffering pieces of life, they render value to the individual. So the individual is directly involved, but not this. So that's unfortunate. But getting back to the Hitler thing, we think of evil as this overt thing. But often it comes in the form of people who have the capacity to see that either what they're doing is not right and they do it anyway, or they take upon themselves power that exceeds their wisdom. And you will find that pattern, that was the crescendo of these two videos. That's what I set out to say. Beware that don't fret yourself so much about the overt evil. That's real and it's quite dangerous, but it's really obvious. What's much more harmful is people who willingly do less than their best, and those who take upon themselves power beyond their wisdom. And again, have the capacity to see that they're overshooting that. So in neither case is that an innocent commission. And those people do and will cause great harm. So, if the vets would apply the same rational capability that they needed to get through vet school, and that they exercise every day in so many other ways, to honestly evaluating the evidence before them when they hit a sacred cow in their belief system, such as the belief that all vaccines are always safe and effective, and when legislators continue to pass or uphold laws that they lack the wisdom to know the goodness of or badness of. As long as things like that continue to happen, the traps are already set. It's like that game Mousetrap. Everything's already set up. You don't even know you're under the cage. You don't even know the things that'll set off the trap. But you will, because the cage is coming and it's going to entrap you. And when it does, the things that will happen to you are much worse than losing your job over your religious beliefs or losing your dog for no good reason. So now is the time that you're given to prepare for those things. And I hope you listen to that. I hope you, first and foremost, remove yourself from the group of those who are guilty of these things. I'm talking about the principles, not the specifics. Remove yourself from the group of people who do less than their best and who take upon themselves power beyond their wisdom. You need to understand that there's no such thing as lie a little, steal a little, take advantage of your neighbor a little. These are huge things. As you go through each day, each time you willingly divert from the best that you know, you are opening massive gates that swing on seemingly small hinges. And the end of all of those paths is death and suffering and misery, far beyond any benefit that you seem to get in the moment or shortly thereafter. And it's going to come to you, and it's going to come to those you love, and it's going to come to those who are innocent of your choices. And all of that is going to weigh very heavily on you in the day of judgment and thereafter. As far as assuming power that exceeds your wisdom, again, with both these things, we're just talking about up to the limit of your current perception. Expanding that perception is a different topic for a different day. But let go of this illusion that you are a sovereign individual in the sense of being all-powerful. You're given so many choices by God, and that sovereignty is not revocable except by and through Him. But as far as society goes, you need to let go of these ideas that you control your own life or that you have any right dictating the lives of others unless you have really good evidence that you know exactly what you're doing and that it truly is for the benefit of the world. And that's a hard throne to sit in. So take more responsibility for the things that are in your own wheelhouse and be less entitled to having a say in things that obviously exceed your capabilities. In all things temporal, in things spiritual, what's a manifestation of this problem? You know, if you can't say that you are fully aligned with Jesus as far as you understand Him to be, that you're doing everything He would do in your place and nothing He wouldn't, your opinion on any gospel topic is worthless. It's that simple. At best, it's a crude sketch that might be efficacious as you attempt to get to the point where you can say that. But you don't know enough to push that out to other people. And you certainly don't know enough to hold other people accountable for what you see as their deviation from your idea of what's good. But everything in between also applies. So much of what you have in life you don't deserve. And there will come a time where it will be taken away unless you consecrate it first. And even then, it's going to be taken away. But God will put you in a better place, whatever that looks like, even if it's with what seems to be less. He gives and He takes away. But it's always for good. After I took care of my dog this morning, I knew I wouldn't be going back to sleep, but all I wanted to do was jump into writing, which with the procession of events and also the things that God was actively teaching me. For example, yesterday morning during my study time, I wasn't able to keep moving on these goals I have for writing. But He made it very clear that this was what I needed to communicate and that I need to make these videos. So they're long, but I hope that you watch them and rewatch them because out of this fire, He's giving you very valuable seeds to grow. And finally, I meant to say this at the beginning. I didn't say it on the first video because the thing died out. I didn't plan on making two. Whenever I share these things, I'm not panning for sympathy. I appreciate all positive vibes. But going back to John 2 and John 3, you know, the great when we want to be grateful to God, the greatest thing we can do is be more like Him. If you want to show your gratitude, just hit pause and think, what more could I do right now? Who's suffering? What unrealized improvement is there in the world? Can I clean up my room? Can I, quoting The Lobster here, can I clean up my room? Can I go do something for someone? Can I go preach the gospel? Can I go help someone see some unrealized improvement and believe a little more that they should do it? Or can I do that myself? That's the best way we can say thank you to God. That's what gives him the most joy. And it's the same for those who are like him, to whatever extent they are. And similarly with expressing sympathies and stuff. You know, the things that I share, they're the smallest piece of what I experience, and that's across the board. But with what seem like negative things, but remember, there's no loss in the Lord. And I mean, in case it's not obvious, I really, truly, sincerely say, the Lord gives and the Lord takes away, and his name is blessed. And who am I to question it? I'm not ecstatic that this needed to happen, but and you know, I've mentioned this, these are of joy. They used to be about sorrow. Now they're all joy. These tears, sometimes they're for the darkness in the hearts of men. That happens. But they're never for my own sorrow anymore. They're never for loss. It's interesting that your two choices are to work for the benefit of the world or to work to get gain for yourself. And ironically, working to get gain for yourself is the worst possible way to get gain for yourself. It's a strategy that's guaranteed to lose. The optimization is to do the opposite, which is to focus everything on everyone else. And that's the gateway to receiving all that God is and has. So a thing is found in its opposite. Anyway, it's very unfortunate that this had to happen, but fortune had nothing to do with it, but you know what I mean. But I know without a shadow of a doubt that I have lived without any regret with my dog, and that locking in that experience with her for these years, I'll see her again. And I know a little bit about what that will be like. And I really am grateful to God that he's taught me sufficiently that I'm able to withstand that pull to remain here in spite of the opportunities continuously placed before me by him to claim what he's promised. And it gives me great joy to think that I can't imagine a better life that a dog could have had. And I know what it cost me to provide that. I wouldn't change a thing. So when I had to euthanize my other dog, I was really wrecked for months, and I've said this before in the books, but that, the Lord, he will give you tools to deal with things like this. And I'm fine. This is, I had to make this video. I had to talk about these things. I got some tears of joy here, but I'm fine. I'm fine. And my kids will be fine. They feel safe and protected in my peace. That comes from God. So I will dig a hole tomorrow morning after the sun comes up and bury her, and continue on with the mission. So no need to express your condolences. I will assume them on your part. And if you want to express something, please do that by thinking of what changes you could make today to be a little bit more like Jesus. And if you can't think of any of those, think of what you could do to help someone else do the same. And that's the answer to that first question. Anyways, all right, see ya.